Thank you very much, Dr. Rines. I want to echo Carl's thanks to Pamela Nadler Emmerich and Adam Emmerich, my sister and brother-in-law, for their generous support of this conference, to Francesca and Bruce Sloven for their support of the conference, and of course to the New York Council of the Humanities, who provided a generous grant to make this day possible. I also want to especially thank Suzanne Leon. I don't know if she's in the room, but Suzanne has done a remarkable job of putting all the pieces together, and without her help, both in preparing the grant for the conference and in getting everything organized for today, the conference would likely not have taken place, and I would likely be locked up in a mental institution. So, Suzanne, thank you very much for all the hard work and wonderful work you've done. I also want to thank my colleague and friend, the Dean of the YIVO Library, Brad Sabin-Hill, for curating and mounting the fascinating exhibit, Spinoza in the Yiddish Mind, which is on display in the mezzanine. I encourage you all to see it before you leave the building today. There are one or two mistakes in the captioning of the exhibit, particularly the large poster, which comes from my living room, not from the YIVO archives. But other than that, it's pretty accurate. The poster of Baruch von Amsterdam, the Yiddish play about Spinoza. Spinoza's legacy has always been, let us say, bipolar. His reputation and his challenging and exacting, and for many people, frightening philosophy has experienced very deep valleys of dismissal and contempt and high peaks of very intensive interest. At times, the interest in Spinoza has raised him almost to the point of beatification. Spinoza was so radical, his philosophy so original and daring, that it is not surprising that he rarely, if ever, experienced or elicited a lukewarm or equivocal reception or response. Spinoza was either reviled as a monstrous atheist. Lessing, Ephraim Gotthold Lessing, complained that people speak of Spinoza as they speak of a dead dog. Or at the other extreme, Spinoza was venerated as the saintly, God-intoxicated man. Novalis coined that phrase, which has been attributed to many other people since. More effusively, Goethe referred to Spinoza as Christianissimus, the embodiment or the perfection of Christian faith. And Schelling also used that term before Goethe to refer to Spinoza. Today's conference is devoted not to Spinoza's philosophy per se. It is not a philosophy conference, but rather to an examination of precisely this legacy, this very conflicted and tormented legacy, from the perspective of the 350th anniversary of the Cherem, which effectively liberated him to be able to lead precisely the kind of life that Spinoza wanted to lead, with no restraints from any religious authorities. If it seems strange, as many friends and colleagues have remarked to me over the past few months as we were preparing for today, that we are commemorating, we seem to be celebrating what has long been viewed in Jewish history, especially in modern Jewish history, as a tragic event, as a horrible mistake, the banishing of Spinoza. Let me say that as the organizer of the conference, from my perspective, the Cherem is the best thing that ever happened to Baruch Spinoza. And so I thought we ought to celebrate it. Had Spinoza not been, and I say that as someone who used to be a rabbi, so if you don't agree with me, I'll ban you. No, just kidding. Had he not been banned, Spinoza might have spent the rest of his life, instead of writing the theological political treatise and the ethics, asking people to please rise when they open the ark, telling them what page to turn to in the Siddur or Machzor. Instead, he became one of the greatest and most celebrated philosophers of the modern period. And the father of the European Enlightenment, as Professor Jonathan Israel has demonstrated so exhaustively in his studies. So we gather here today, first of all, not to mourn the Cherem, but to rejoice in it, to celebrate it, to thank the rabbis publicly, finally, for excommunicating Baruch Spinoza, for allowing Spinoza, in fact, encouraging him to become the great radical philosopher that he was by throwing him out of the Jewish community first. The scholarly study and public interest in Spinoza of the past decade have been really remarkable. There has been a renaissance of interest in Spinoza, and it's reflected in the amazing number of publications that keep appearing year after year. Both of our panelists in this morning's session have contributed richly to this phenomenal renaissance of both the academic and public interest in Baruch Spinoza and his philosophy. Our first speaker today is Professor Stephen Nadler, Professor of Philosophy and of Jewish Studies at the University of Wisconsin and former director of the Jewish Studies program there. The Jewish Studies program there is the Moss Weinstein Jewish Studies Center for Jewish Studies, and one of the benefactors, the late Lawrence Weinstein, was a board member of the YIVO Institute. He used to come in from Madison, Wisconsin for all the board meetings. He used to fly in from Madison, and so there's a connection between YIVO and the Moss Weinstein Center besides the two Nadlers. Professor Nadler has been invited to these deliberations not because, not on account of any nepotism on my part. The fact that his Zeta Sam and my Zeta Harry were brothers did not at all influence my choice of speaker on the topic that we have to begin with, and that is, why was Spinoza excommunicated? On the contrary, the family has been bitterly divided for many generations. I don't want to go into the dispute. We started late and we don't have time. I was planning to spend some time on it, but it has to do with a stolen samovar from Bucharest, which belongs to my Zeta Harry, and I suspect, and I suspect it's hidden somewhere in an attic or basement in Madison, Wisconsin. Despite this typically Romanian crime, I had no choice but to invite Stephen to address us here today because he is the authority on this topic. He is the author of both the best English language biography of Spinoza. Oh, 3 Romanians just left. We have more seats. He's the author of the best English language biography of Spinoza, Spinoza, A Life, 1999. That includes a long, detailed chapter describing the Cherem and its circumstances, and which was the recipient of the Koret Book Award for biography. Professor Nadler's subsequent book, Spinoza's Heresy, published in 2002, addresses itself largely to the question of why Spinoza was excommunicated. Professor Nadler is also the author of Rembrandt's Jews, 2003, a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize in 2004, and in addition to his work on Spinoza, he has written and edited several volumes on the French essentialist philosopher Malebranche, most recently the Cambridge Companion to Malebranche, which was published in 2000. His most recent book, to my great annoyance, just appeared in 2006. Now, it's a wonderful book. It's called Spinoza's Ethics and Introduction, and having just finished reading it last night, I predict it will become the standard university textbook for students beginning their study of this very fascinating and difficult philosopher. It's my great pleasure to introduce Professor Stephen Nadler.